Hi guys, welcome back and welcome to another Formula 1 build video. In this video I'm going to build Tamiya's Tyrrell Honda 020 from the 1991 Formula 1 season, and I have two lots of this kit. Why do I have two? Well, the first build I'm going to build as per the box art in this dark grey, black and white Braun livery. And then the second kit I'm going to build in this livery here, which is the 1991 pre-season livery. So this is very similar to Tyrrell's 1990 livery, and it was going to be used on the 1991 car until the Braun sponsorship came through and they moved to the black and white scheme. So the two builds are going to be identical because the two cars were identical. It's simply the livery, the decals, the paintwork which are different. And looking in the box, the decals for both kits are pretty nasty. There's no way we can sort these out. I need new decals for both versions. So these are the decals for the Braun livery. I forget who made these, I think it was Taboo. And then here are the museum collection decals for the pre-season livery. So if you haven't built a Tamiya F1 kit before, or in fact any F1 kit before, a good strategy is always to start to build the sub-assemblies first. Unlike an armour model where you tend to build the entire tank and then paint it, cars tend to be a little bit more like aircraft, in terms of you need to build some sub-assemblies, paint them, build a few more and so on. So the sub-assemblies I tend to look for are things like here, the engine cover, and of course I'll need to fill and sand those gaps to make them nice and smooth. Often the nose cone can be built up as well. I only built up the nose and the wing for the pre-season version because the entire thing is white, whereas on the full season version there are multiple colours, so it's best to paint those separately and construct them later on. The engine block is another key assembly on the F1 kits, and even if you're planning to build it with the engine cover glued shut, you do still need to build the engine block because the suspension arms stick in the back of that, and quite often it will be partially visible as well, either through the back of the vehicle or through vents in the side pod, so you do normally need to paint it as well, even if the engine cover is going to remain in place. In this particular case, because the instructions called out black for most of the engine block, I decided to build everything, including the suspension arms, and then just pick out the smaller details that might be a different colour. And again, on the black Braun version of this car, the rear wing can be added because that's also the same colour, semi-gloss black. There does appear to be a small mistake on the museum collection diagram here, where it shows the rear wing of this car in black. But if we look at the reference photos, it clearly shows that that top plate of the wing should be white. So it's always a good lesson to look at some reference photos there. In terms of the driver's seat, the approach I normally take is to glue the seat to any control panels that might be there, and then I attach that seat to one half of the cockpit. And that will allow me to paint both sides of the cockpit interior in semi-gloss black before sticking them together. And here you can see all of the components and sub-components which are ready for priming and painting. And these particular components are all the ones which need to be semi-gloss black. And of course that includes the under tray as well. And once they are primed in Tamiya grey primer, this is what they look like. Immediately this looks a lot more like a Formula 1 car than a box of bits. Of course it's not glued together yet. Everything can still be disassembled, but we get an idea of what's to come. Here is the cockpit with the interior painted semi-gloss black. I've made sure to bring that black right to the nose cone because otherwise you can see the plastic through the holes where the suspension arms go. And I've learned from experience that there's not a whole lot of point of painting the seat belts now. I'll do that once the final paint job is finished. The fit here wasn't brilliant and it did need quite a lot of persuasion, some pushing, some pulling, some clamping and taping together, and even then quite a bit of filling and sanding to get a smooth surface. And here you can see the engine block being built up, a few bits of detail picked out on it. I'm not one personally to super detail the engine. Generally speaking, these models go on my shelf. I don't really remove the engine covers to have a look inside, but it is nice to know that they're there. Now painting of course is what sets these two models apart, and the Braun livery is a very strange colour. Tamiya recommends TS42, which is a light metallic grey, and my understanding is that Tamiya typically brings out a spray paint to match their car kits. But if we look at the reference images, we see that it's hard to see a direct match between the Tamiya paint and the real cars. But again, if we look at the reference images, some of them appear almost black and others appear a much lighter grey. So, although I'm not 100% convinced by Tamiya's colour choice, I did decide to go with it in the end. I did consider going for the darker metallic grey which I used on my McLaren MP431, which you can see here. I haven't made a build video for this yet, but I will do. But in the end I decided to go for the Tamiya recommended colour. And you can see how that colour does change as I move the light around here. And of course the thicker the coat, the darker it will be. I was a bit concerned that the dark grey paint would show through the white decals, so I took an old piece of styrene, painted it in the grey, and then used the old kit decal over the top to check that, and it seems to work really well. The decal seems to be thick enough to not show the grey through. So here are the two kits side by side, obviously the Braun one on the left in the grey and the pre-season version in the overall white at the moment. Both of these were painted with Tamiya spray cans. The exhausts on this kit, and I have to say quite a few F1 kits, not just Tamiya, were quite hard to fit. To get them to match up with the holes in the engine and to point out the rear of the car was quite difficult, but I got there in the end. The paint colour there is a mix of gold and chrome. Attaching the cockpit to the floor is always a bit tricky on these kits. There's quite a small amount of contact area, and there's quite a bit of force going through that because the front wheels of course are attached to the front of the cockpit, so there's a little bit of torque going on there as well. So it's really important that you make sure those joints are sanded clear of paint, and I tend to use super glue as well to get a stronger bond there. It's best to make sure the engine cover is in place for the decals, and then if there are any decals which cover the gap between the engine and the cockpit, you can cut those later once they've been applied. Fitting the engine covers is always a bit difficult on these older Tamiya kits. I think it's just because of the age of the kits and the fact the parts are warped slightly. They do need a bit of persuasion. There are normally some guiding pins, and generally speaking, if you click those in place and you do it slowly, then they will go down. But it can be a bit frustrating. It's a good idea to make sure that the car is gloss coated at this stage as well, otherwise fitting that engine cover can end up scratching paintwork on the engine and the suspension and so on. You might notice on these museum collection decals that there are absolutely no guides as to which number decals go where. Now obviously that's not such a big problem with things like the Shell or the Epsom decal, because there's only a couple of them. But on the sheet there are these fine silver lines which demark the blue and the white areas, and there's a bit of reverse engineering involved there to figure out which one is which. In particular with these curved decals which go towards the end of the engine cover. And the best solution I found for this was to put the decals underneath a piece of clear plastic, put some Tamiya masking tape over the top, trace the shape of that decal, and then of course I can use that as a mask when I'm applying the blue paint, as you can see there. And here is the pre-season version after the masking and painting. This was XF8 flat blue, and again with a coat of TS13 these decals all went down very nicely indeed. There were no major issues here whatsoever. For the Braun livery, these white stripes went down really well, and they have nice guidance in terms of holes for the suspension arms and even the ends of the decals are shaped so that they go around the cockpit parts very nicely. It's very easy to get them lined up in the right place. And I use some Tamiya mark set over the top to get them to go down properly. I did try to use the helmet decals which were supplied because they would have worked for both versions of the car, but I just could not get them to conform to those Tamiya helmets. Getting these decals to go around these curved surfaces is beyond my skill level at the moment, I think. I haven't come across an F1 kit yet which doesn't require sanding of the tyres. There's always going to be a seam mark somewhere on them. I found the easiest way is to put the wheel inserts in first to keep the tyres rigid, and then just sand away. The museum collection decals don't include any markings for the tyres, but I was extremely surprised to find that the original Tamiya decals still were in decent condition and went down on the tyres nicely and stayed down as well. I don't know what you call these, it's the kind of older style where you remove the backing and put them on in reverse and just sort of rub them onto the tyre. And once the tyres were done, it was time to assemble some aspects like the front wing. And then here are the cars almost complete. And of course the nose needs to go on the Braun version before that final central white stripe goes down. This was probably the most difficult decal to put down. It tore quite easily, and getting it to conform and getting the interior triangle decal to conform as well was quite difficult, but I got there in the end. Finally, once the decals were dry and with a little bit of trepidation and an extremely sharp knife, I cut the decal there between the cockpit and the engine cover. Okay, and before I show you the final version of the cars, let me take a moment to say thank you very much to my Patreons. Those of you who are members of the Patreon scheme will have seen images of this car a few weeks ago now. One of the benefits of signing up there is you do get lots of work in progress pictures and previews of upcoming videos as well. So a special thanks to people who have supported me through that channel, and any income from that does go back into products for the channel. Okay guys, and that concludes our build of the Tyrrell 020 in the pre-season and the full season sponsorship. I really hope you enjoyed that video. I had great fun building these kits, and I've been looking a lot more recently at alternative decal sets for F1 cars, so hopefully I can start to build some different cars which weren't originally released as kits. As always, I've got lots of kits in progress and lots of videos coming up. Whether you are an armour modeller, an F1 car modeller, an aircraft modeller, or you like dioramas, there will be something for you in a future video. So I hope to see you again soon, and until then, thank you very much for watching.